Hey everyone, we've got some big and unexpected news today. Saudi Arabia is on the verge of launching a nuclear program, and it looks like they're doing it without any coordination or agreement with Israel. At the same time, there's something strange going on with Iran. After their recent talks with the US, it seems like both sides kind of walked away without resolving anything. Apparently, the Americans and Iranians are already planning a second round of negotiations because the first round didn't really solve much. On another front, just a few days ago, I mentioned that a ground operation might happen in Yemen. Now it looks like ground troops are actually being deployed to fight the Houthis. Clearly, US airstrikes didn't do the job, so it seems like boots on the ground are the next step. I've got a ton of really important and serious updates for you today about Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Yemen. This is stuff you definitely need to know. But before I dive into the details, let me give you the full backstory so it all makes sense. Today's updates might be unlike anything you've heard before, especially when it comes to the behind-the-scenes stuff. Let's start with the negotiations between the US and Iran. There's a second round of talks planned for this coming Saturday. Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, offered to host the talks and suggested that Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Yaqi and US envoy Steve Witkoff meet in Rome. But Iran said no. They want to hold the talks in Muscat, Oman, just like the first round. So what's going to happen next?
Well, from what I can tell, the Americans don't really make a big deal about where the talks take place. Whether it's Muscat or Rome, the US is focused on finding a solution and won't let the location get in the way.
Melanie, on the other hand, really wants to host these talks, and it's pretty clear why. Europe has felt left out ever since Donald Trump took office. He negotiated directly with Russia, started trade wars with China, and held talks with Iran, all without involving the EU. That's why Melanie is pushing to bring the negotiations to Rome. But if things get complicated, the talks will probably end up happening in Oman again.
Now you might be wondering what actually went down during the first round of negotiations. According to Axios, the talks started out indirectly, just like I mentioned before. Iran wanted to keep things indirect, while the US preferred a direct approach. In the end, they compromised by starting with indirect talks, with each side in a separate room, and later moving to face-to-face discussions. The Americans say the direct part of the talks lasted about 45 minutes, while the Iranians claim it was only 15.
Whether it was 15 or 45 minutes doesn't really matter. What's more interesting is how Iran is downplaying the meetings, trying to look tough and unwilling to make concessions, while also carefully avoiding anything that would completely derail the talks with the US.
Now here's the real bombshell, according to the Wall Street Journal. During the talks, US envoy Steve Witkoff didn't even ask Iran to dismantle its nuclear program or get rid of its weapons capabilities. That's a huge surprise. Remember, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu had pushed Trump to demand a deal like the one with Libya in 2003, where Libya dismantled its program and shipped everything out under US supervision. But during this latest round of talks, Witkoff didn't ask for that at all. Instead, the US reportedly asked Iran to just limit its uranium enrichment, not shut down the whole program. Specifically, Witkoff told the Iranians they could enrich uranium up to 3.67%. If they stick to that limit, the US wouldn't ask for anything else. Enrichment levels like 20% or 60% would be completely off the table, since the US insists no civilian nuclear program needs that kind of high-level enrichment, regardless of what Iran claims. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Iran itself pointed out that the original nuclear deal signed under Obama also capped enrichment at 3.67%. Then in 2018, Trump pulled the US out of that deal, calling it weak and ineffective. Now, the US is basically asking Iran to go back to the same limits. So what's the difference this time around? According to the Wall Street Journal, the original deal under Obama had two major flaws. The 3.67% enrichment cap was only temporary. The restrictions would eventually expire, allowing Iran to ramp things back up later. After Iran was basically given free rein to enrich uranium however it wanted, Trump is now pushing for a new deal that would make the 3.67% enrichment limit permanent. No expiration date, no flexibility for Iran in the future. But that's not all. Steve Witkoff also brought up something that wasn't even part of Obama's original deal: Iran's missile program. The US wants to include that in the talks now too, something Iran has always refused to discuss. Like it or not, that's a clear sign that things are shifting. The US has already made a major concession. They're not asking Iran to dismantle its nuclear program anymore. Instead, they're just asking them to reduce uranium enrichment levels. When US reporters asked Donald Trump about the negotiations during a meeting with the president of El Salvador, he described the talks as constructive and positive and said, "I'm not asking for much. I just don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons." Even the Salvadoran president sitting next to him joked, "Even El Salvador shouldn't have nukes," which got a few laughs. But somehow, Trump, of all people, is making compromises no one expected. This is the same guy who pulled the US out of the nuclear deal, and now he seems eager to rejoin it, or at least something very close. So, what changed? The truth is, despite all of Trump's fiery threats against Iran, he doesn't actually want a war. Every few days, he talks about how the US is ready to strike Iran and how American bombers are stationed in Diego Garcia ready to go. But when it comes down to it, what Trump really wants is a nuclear deal. Why? Because if Trump manages to negotiate a new agreement with Iran, it would be a huge political win. He'd get all the credit without having to start a war, and it could even help stabilize the region, especially between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Avoiding a military conflict would let Trump position himself as a peacemaker, which would be a major political advantage. According to The Guardian, the chances of a successful deal now are actually higher than they were during Obama's presidency. And for several reasons, the pressure on Iran isn't from US military threats in the Middle East. It's coming from Iran's own crumbling economy. Ever since Trump imposed tough sanctions, the Iranian economy has become one of the regime's biggest weaknesses, and it's created a lot of internal pressure. Iran's military strength is not what it used to be. The confidence and arrogance Iran had during the Obama years, that's pretty much gone now. Trump is more serious than ever about the military option, and Iran knows it. Put together, these three factors suggest that Iran might be more willing to make serious concessions, especially when it comes to uranium enrichment. That said, don't expect Iran to roll over. They're not just going to accept America's demands overnight. Iran is known for being extremely tough in negotiations. In fact, some people say the only negotiators tougher than the Iranians are the Israelis. Back in 2015, Iran gave the US and European diplomats a really hard time during the nuclear talks. So now, the US has set two main conditions for any new deal. Iran must ship out its stockpile of 60% enriched uranium to a third country. Russia has already refused to take it, saying, "Why should we take Iran's enriched uranium? We don't want it." The US wants much stricter monitoring than what was agreed to in 2015. That means more inspectors and tougher oversight mechanisms. Despite all this, the Americans seem optimistic that a new agreement is possible. But there's something important to keep in mind. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is still very skeptical. According to reports, he doesn't believe that talks with the US will ever lead to a real agreement. Even so, he did say he was satisfied with the recent round of talks and expressed confidence in Iran's position. At the same time, he questioned the Americans' true intentions.
On state TV, he said that while the first round of negotiations went fine, he remains suspicious of the other side's motives. Still, he's optimistic about Iran's own capabilities and warned that the country's future shouldn't depend on the outcome of these negotiations. He reminded everyone not to repeat past mistakes.
Now here's a question. Why did Iran request another round of talks just a week later? Even Trump pointed this out, saying, "We had negotiations last Saturday," and added that another meeting would be announced soon. He said the talks could be productive and urged Iran to give up its nuclear ambitions. Trump also stressed the need to act fast, warning that Iran is getting closer to building nuclear facilities. Iran is actively pursuing a nuclear bomb, and if strong action becomes necessary, the United States says it will take it. Not for its own benefit, but for the good of the world. As some officials have said, Iran's leaders are extremists. Some reports suggest that Iran wants to involve other global powers in the process, especially Russia and China. Iran's foreign ministry announced that Deputy Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi will visit Moscow by the end of the week for consultations about the indirect nuclear talks Iran has been holding with the U.S. in Muscat, Oman. A second round of talks is scheduled for the following Saturday. It looks like Iran is trying to buy some time, to assess its position and to pressure the supreme leader into approving a deal. One way or another, it's clear that countries across the region, especially in the Middle East, are pushing both the US and Iran to reach an agreement. Everyone wants to avoid another war in the region. No one wants more conflict, that's for sure. Another important point, these talks with Iran are anything but easy, especially when you consider that during these negotiations, Iran's key regional ally, the Houthis in Yemen, are suffering heavy losses.
Even though the U.S. airstrikes haven't been overwhelmingly successful, the U.S. has already spent nearly $1 billion on this campaign in just the last 3 weeks, and they're probably heading towards spending a second billion soon. These strikes have definitely hurt the Houthis.
Meanwhile, Yemen's national army and the internationally recognized government are preparing for a major ground offensive. They believe the Houthis are weaker now than ever, especially with U.S. involvement in the conflict.
Saudi Arabia has told both the U.S. and the Houthis that it won't participate in any ground operations, but preparations are clearly underway for a large-scale attack. Though nothing is confirmed, it looks likely that UAE-backed forces like the Giants Brigades might join the fight with the goal of pushing deep into Houthi strongholds, including in southern Sudan and Marib. That would be a major turning point in the conflict.
At the same time, the U.S. remains deeply involved in the air campaign and might even provide special forces or command support. That's helped boost the morale of Yemen's legitimate government forces. All of this puts Iran in a very tough spot. On one hand, it's negotiating with the U.S. On the other hand, its proxies, like the Houthis, are taking serious hits. It's not an easy position for Tehran. So here's the big question. Who's the biggest winner in all this? The answer, Saudi Arabia. Now, before anyone says I'm trying to hype up Saudi Arabia or boost views by talking about them, let me be clear. My videos about Saudi Arabia are actually among the least watched on my channel, even though I have a decent Saudi audience. Right now, the hot topics are all about Gaza, not Saudi Arabia. I've always tried to speak respectfully about Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries, and I've never used my videos to insult any nation. Now back to the point. According to the New York Times, the US and Saudi Arabia are very close to finalizing a nuclear cooperation agreement. And if that goes through, Saudi Arabia could soon become a country capable of developing nuclear weapons. That would be a major game changer.
Here's why. The Saudis have made it clear that if Iran keeps its nuclear program or builds a bomb, Saudi Arabia will immediately seek its own nuclear arsenal. So it looks like this new deal might involve the U.S. asking Iran to scale back uranium enrichment, and in return, Washington would help transfer nuclear technology to Saudi Arabia.
There's another layer to this. The ongoing Saudi-Israeli normalization talks. When President Biden discussed this with the Saudis, the U.S. pushed for full diplomatic ties with Israel. But the Saudis made it clear. They want their own civilian nuclear program before any normalization happens. Let's not forget that while all of this is going on, Gaza is under relentless attack, and the West Bank is also facing immense pressure. So the possibility of Saudi Arabia becoming a nuclear power is very real.
Some reports even say that if Trump returns to office, he plans to sign the Saudi nuclear deal as early as mid-May. That would be a huge and historic move. Now let's get into the details. During a press conference in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia's capital, U.S. Energy Secretary Christopher White announced that Washington will sign a civil nuclear energy and technology agreement with Saudi Arabia. He also said that more information about this U.S.-Saudi nuclear partnership will be shared later this year.
When President Biden was in talks with the Saudis, he expressed his interest in Saudi-Israeli normalization. But when the Saudis asked for a peaceful civilian nuclear program, Biden responded that such a deal could cause serious problems for him and Congress. On the other hand, Donald Trump made it clear he has no issue with Saudi Arabia getting civilian nuclear power. Thanks so much for watching. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Here at X News, we're committed to bringing you quality updates. See you soon in the next video.